Great. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for that introduction. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for having me today. So I'm just going to share some slides with you. Just bear with me 1 second. Right. Can you all see the slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much. So, as Jonathan said, I'm a senior lecturer in criminology at the School for Policy Studies, University of Bristol. So, turning literature reviews into academic publications is something that I have done in the past. So, I'm going to draw on the insights based on my PhD experience funded by the DTP between 2017 and 2021, and also drawing on my editorial roles with 2 journals, namely Justice, Power and Resistance, and also International Journal of Prison Health. So a little bit of context about what I published during my PhD. So this is an author declaration at the beginning of my PhD, where during this period, I published 8 peer-reviewed articles and a book chapter from my thesis. And the ones that you see highlighted in yellow on the screen right now come from my literature review chapter. So I think that publishing early in your PhD journey will provide you with a vantage point, something that I will elaborate now. So why consider publishing from your literature review? So first of all, it will give you a competitive advantage when you apply for jobs. Now, 40% of PhD students these days will go into academia, whereas the remaining will go into the industry. Regardless, publishing, irrespective of the field that you are venturing into, provides a competitive advantage. So this is something that I experienced towards the end of my PhD. So towards the final months of my PhD, I applied for several academic jobs in the UK. I was shortlisted for 3 posts, and during the interview for these 3 posts, actually before I attended the interview, the panel members asked me to submit 1 or 2 journal articles that are aligned with the Research Excellence Framework, REF. We will talk about REF shortly, but what it is that these publications need to demonstrate originality, significance, and rigor. So having published my articles and also having assessed, independently assessed these outputs by several colleagues to be 3-star, which is considered to be internationally excellent, and also 4-star world-leading research, I was able to confidently go to the interview and say that, hi, I have published, I am research active, and I am not going to be a risky appointment. So to cut the story short, I was offered a couple of lectureship posts, one at the University of Bristol and another one at another Russell Group institution, university, not very far from here. And I declined to attend the 3rd interview because I've already got 2 great offers by that time. So think about why you want to publish, and hopefully you will realize that it's going to be giving you the career advantage. Secondly, it is about giving you the opportunity to contribute to knowledge. Now, your PhD is going to be an original research, so why not share that knowledge with the world? And increasingly, as you already know, the UKRI demands research impact from the research that you are currently doing. So might as well take this advantage to publish from your literature review. And incidentally, and quite surprisingly, I found that it really helped with my Viva preparation. What was surprising during my Viva in June 2021 was that the examiner said, we have seen that you have published a set of articles, and they come from some parts of your thesis, including your literature review. So we are not going to ask you questions in relation to those areas of work, which means that, meaning to say is that they have trusted that there have been scholars who have vetted the articles, who have checked the rigor, the originality, and the significance, and therefore they did not want to ask any questions on those areas of my thesis and proceed with asking me questions on the other areas of my thesis. So it can help you with the Viva preparation and also Viva question. And finally, it is going to be giving you the financial incentives. Now, every year, academics who are registered with the Authors Licensing and Collecting Society, ALCS, are usually paid a couple of times a year in March and September for the royalty of their publication. So when people read your articles, when people print your articles and even photocopy, you'll get some money out of it. So hopefully that provides you with some understanding of why you should consider publishing from your literature review. Now, let's have a look at the question of how you can turn your literature review chapters into article. The first tip that I'm going to ask you to do is that immediately after this webinar, have a look at your existing literature review chapters. So review your literature review chapters for publishable content. Now, some of you might have 2 or 3 literature review chapters ready. Some of you might have one, but several sections that can be tied in together. So have a look at some of these materials that are nearly publishable or closest to article ready. Now, journal articles are usually between 3,000 and 8,000 words. And I'm very confident that many, if not all of you, have written beyond 8,000 words, which I mean to say is that you probably have something ready to publish already at this stage. So have a look at your literature review chapters, look at things that you can publish quickly, and try to tailor the manuscript to the language specific. So for example, replace this chapter with this article, and have a look at the journal's formatting and submission guidelines carefully. Second tip, choosing the right journal. Now, there is no right or wrong answer, actually, when it comes to selecting the right journal for your publication. But some of these factors I would like you to consider. And the first one, which is very important, is to choose the journal according to the relevance. So you need to identify relevant journals for your manuscript, for your article. In order to do so, have a look at the aim and the scope of the journal. Because what you don't want to do is actually, after you submit the manuscript, a couple of days later, the editors reject your manuscript to say this does not fit with the journal's aim or scope. If it is not clear, always, always, always email the editors and ask whether your article will be suitable for the journal. The second tip, the second factor to consider is to look at your reference list. So if there are 2 or 3 journals that keep appearing in your reference list, it shows that it is a possibility that those journals will publish your article. Often students can rely on supervisors' advice as they are senior in the field, so ask your supervisors as well, and consider the audience who you would like to speak to. So if you want to speak to the audience, primarily academic audience, then you should consider journals that are quite theoretical. Now, in some disciplines, you want to target audience who come from practitioners background or policymakers. So try to look at who the audiences are for this journal. It is likely that you will have 2 or 3 journals that you think, right, I think these 2 or 3 journals will accept my paper. Then the tiebreaker should be the impact factor. The higher impact factor of the journal is, the higher the chance that your articles will be cited again and again. Given the fact that your PhD is time limited, so speed is of an essence, consider the timescale of publication. Usually, good journals will publish metrics of the timescale. For example, the timescale between submission and the first decision from the reviewers, for example. So have a look at the timescale of publication and avoid predatory journals. So predatory journals will ask you to pay upfront even before your article is being considered by the editor. So avoid this kind of journals. And if in doubt, always do due diligence checks on the journals that you are going to publish. Now, in your article, in your manuscript, you need to demonstrate alignment with REF. So REF stands for Research Excellence Framework. So the UK Research Excellence Framework evaluates the outputs by academics in the UK for every 5 years, and increasingly in Australia as well. So this will be important for those of you who are considering to have a job in the UK or Australia. So your journal articles need to demonstrate the alignment with the REF criteria: originality, significance, and rigor. Now, originality is not hard for you to prove that to the readers, given the fact that your research is a PhD, so it is likely it's going to be original anyway. So have a look at significance in terms of the potential of your literature review can influence the field, and the rigor. And also take the advantage of open access funding. So open access funding is something that UKRI will pay for your publications if your publications come from your thesis. Open access makes your work freely available to readers, so it is not behind a paywall. Now, we are very lucky in the global north countries that our libraries actually subscribe to many, many journals, which means that we can easily get access to journal articles. But if your field is international, if you want global readership, think about people who are in Nigeria or Malaysia or South Korea. It is likely that these readers do not have access to the journal articles. They're not subscribed to certain journals. And therefore, if you pay for the open access through the UKRI, you will be able to make your articles readable anywhere in the world. Speak to your university librarian early in the process. Now, this is going to be a controversial topic: navigating co-authorship. I assume that some of you have not published in journals, which is absolutely fine. And sometimes co-authorship can be valuable to allow you to enter into this publishing world. So co-authorship can be together with your supervisors or with someone senior in the field or a collaborator. It can help you to enter the field of publications and try to learn some tips and tricks from them, but it is important to manage things carefully. This is partly because during my PhD years and even until today, I have seen some senior academics steal the work of PhD students. So don't let others claim undue credit because your work deserves recognition. So what you can do is actually to set the expectations early. Be clear about who contributed what. Are they contributing to the conceptual insights? Are they contributing towards methodological advice? Are they contributing towards drafting or writing? And you need to make sure that your contributions are substantial so that you can claim that in your thesis. Say yes to special issues. Now, special issues often appear in top journals, and they tend to be linked to some top conferences in your field as well. Special issues tend to be curated by leading scholars in your field. So if you see special issue calls for special issues, if you see invitations to publish through special issues, and if your topic is aligned with the special issues, always, always, always say yes. So participating in special issues can raise visibility, position your work alongside respected researchers, and also help to build academic profile and community presence. And be careful of invitations to write book chapters. Now, book chapters are quite similar to special issues, where book chapters tend to be something that are curated by leading scholars in the field as well. However, books do not have the same kind of like accelerated publication timeline as articles. So book chapters can take years to publish, and they are often behind the paywall unless someone purchases the book. So be careful of invitations to write book chapters. Usually these days, the default for me is not to write book chapters unless it is a world-leading textbook that I want my name to be in that book chapters. So be careful of that. And always, always, always say no to writing blogs. Now, I see that so many blog publishers, well-known blog publishers, invite PhD students to write blogs. And I found that very concerning. So you don't get a citation count if you write blogs, and you're not given intellectual property protection if you publish blogs. Someone can simply take your idea, run with it, and say, this is my original contribution. There's no intellectual property protection, and you're not going to get citations from writing blogs. So focus your limited time and energy and outputs that build your academic profile and credibility. Ask for feedback. Once you have drafted the manuscript, always ask for feedback. Ask your supervisors, ask your trusted colleagues for feedback, and make sure you name them in your acknowledgement section. Now, assuming that the journal editor really likes your article, so it will progress through the peer review process. And then you need to be able to, you need to have thick skin when reviewing the reviewer's feedback. Now, remember the first, a couple of slides during the first, during the early part of my introduction, where there's the first, what is it called, journal article that I published that remains the highest cited article to date. That manuscript was sent to 5 peer reviewers, and 5 of them came back with quite conflicting, and I remember reviewers 3 and 5 gave quite condemning feedback. So my advice to you, if you receive really harsh feedback, take a step back, take a deep breath, and just make the correction. And don't give up on rejection. So rejection tends to happen at two stages during the publication journey. The first one is the desk reject, where after a few days, you submit your journal article, your manuscript, the editors comes back to you to say, this doesn't fit with the journal, so we are going to reject it. It has nothing to do with the quality. So simply identify another journal and move on. Now, rejection can also happen after the editors receive feedback from the peer reviewers. Now, this is very, very rare. So if that happens, again, take a deep breath, look at the criticisms put forward by the peer reviewers and see whether they are justified, make those corrections and resubmit to another journal. Now, very quickly, before I end my presentation, this is my invitation to you to publish in a journal that I co-edit called Justice, Power and Resistance. We are an international peer-reviewed journal. So if your PhD, if your literature reviews are about social justice, state accountability, decarceration, political accountability, for example, please do consider publishing with this journal. And if you are unsure about the fit of your topic with the journal, I'll be very happy to hear from you. Just drop me an email. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation.
Thank you very, very much, Nasrul. That was fantastic. I think that was a gold mine of tips in that. We will now move on swiftly to Freya's presentation. We will also invite questions towards the end of the session today, questions for both our speakers. And if you want to ask questions, just drop that in the comment in the chat box. But for now, Freya, please.
Okay, so hello, I'm Dr. Freya Wise and I'm an ESRC Fellow at the University of the West of England. My research focuses on interdisciplinary approaches to carbon reduction from buildings, including both technical and social aspects and using multiple methods. Today I'm going to discuss a systematic literature review that I and a colleague have been doing and that we're just about to submit for publication. I'll provide some brief context to the topic and then explain how the review came about, the process of doing it and the next steps, and then I'll end with some reflections on the key takeaways. I'll start off by explaining a few key concepts. As I'm sure you're all aware, climate change is a major issue and increased progress in reducing carbon emissions is desperately needed, because as you can see on the CAP thermometer on the slide, we're well off course for limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. Energy used to operate and construct buildings and its associated emissions is responsible for around 34% of global emissions, so there's clear potential for carbon reduction. However, in the UK and Europe, the rate at which the existing building stock is replaced with new buildings is very slow, and it's estimated that 80 to 90% of the current building stock will still be in use in 2050. Reducing carbon from existing buildings, as well as constructing low-carbon new buildings, is therefore critical and is done through the process of retrofit or renovation. Retrofit is the process of making changes to an existing building to improve some aspect of its performance. It includes improvements to the fabric of the building, for example adding insulation to walls, roofs or floors, making improvements to windows and reducing drafts, and improvements to building systems, such as installing low-carbon heating, improving indoor air quality, and enhancing the efficiency of lighting, heating and hot water. It can also include adding on-site renewables such as solar panels and energy storage with batteries, as well as alterations to improve the resilience of buildings to changing climates, like adding shading or shutters to windows to reduce summer overheating. Finally, it can involve changes to how people use buildings. If retrofit is done well and takes a holistic approach, it should lead to lower carbon emissions, buildings that are healthier and more comfortable for users, and lower energy costs. However, buildings are complex systems and there's a need for better modelling of existing buildings and increased understanding of their performance and of user behaviours, as well as improvements in the skills and knowledge of the building sector to make retrofit at scale and at the speed required. So there's lots of different aspects to research. Retrofitting existing buildings to reduce carbon and help address climate change is therefore an important topic. However, it generally focuses on reducing a building's in-use or operational energy and carbon. To get a full view of the impact of any new construction or retrofit, we must also consider the energy and carbon required to make, transport, install or construct a building or retrofit, and that required to maintain it, and then finally dispose of it at the end of its life. This is known as the embodied energy and carbon. Together, the operational and embodied carbon form the whole life or life cycle impacts. Research has shown that retrofit makes greater carbon savings than demolishing existing buildings and then constructing new ones because of the embodied carbon cost. However, it's still important to make sure that a retrofit maximises the operational carbon savings and minimises the embodied carbon costs so that it makes the greatest life cycle carbon savings. Those are the key terms for what we'll be talking about, so now I'll move on to the review itself. Currently, in the UK, regulations on the performance of buildings only consider operational energy and carbon, neglecting embodied and life cycle impacts. A group of professional organisations and academics came together in 2022 to develop an evidence and science-based voluntary UK net zero carbon building standard to provide performance-based targets for the life cycle carbon of UK buildings for both new construction and retrofit. Myself and my colleague and former supervisor, Professor Alice Moncaster, were involved in one of the standards working groups. We identified that there was much less evidence on embodied carbon in retrofit than there was for new buildings, and at a meeting in late 2023, Alice suggested that she and I could do a systematic review of the academic literature on embodied carbon in retrofit to see if we could fill, or at least more clearly identify, some of these gaps. And everyone else in the group went, "Good idea, we're sure that would be really useful, let us know when you've done it." And that was about as far as the commissioning of the literature review went. In the best traditions of academics, we then got a bit carried away and decided that a review of the global academic literature on retrofit and embodied, operational or life cycle carbon for all types of buildings would be a good idea, that we keep our search terms broad, and that any papers that dealt with existing buildings and quantified actual or potential energy and carbon savings would be included. We agreed some search terms and decided to search Science Direct and Scopus as the two main databases, looking at papers going back to 2013 to give us a 10-year timeframe. We decided to focus on peer-reviewed journal articles and to exclude review and conference papers and book chapters because these generally have more limited peer review. We also excluded papers not written in English for pragmatic reasons. We used Boolean operators and a range of the most common terms in the field. LCA is short for life cycle assessment, which is the technique used for identifying embodied or life cycle impacts, while zero or nearly zero energy buildings are terms often used in this field, especially in Europe. The search terms were quite broad and returned 6,739 papers across the two databases. Many of them were not relevant, so I conducted an initial title screening on the search platform. There were quite a lot, for example, that related to the retrofit of ships or power stations rather than to buildings, and a range of papers with great titles that were nonetheless not relevant. We could, of course, have included the term building in our search terms, but we decided not to because some of the papers might refer to houses, offices, apartments, churches or airports, and be relevant for the study, but still not mention buildings. So we preferred to sift out the non-relevant ones and therefore hopefully catch more of the ones we wanted. I downloaded the links, titles, authors and abstracts of the articles with relevant titles into my reference management software Zotero, and then removed duplicates from the two databases, which left 1,417 potentially relevant papers. I then exported the data into a numbers spreadsheet and did an initial analysis of publication dates and the journals that the papers were published in to check that we were getting a good range and finding the journals that we would expect to see. This initial search showed that the number of papers increased substantially from 34 in 2013 to 239 in 2023. I wanted to see whether this was higher than the background rate of increase in research, so I did searches on Science Direct for papers in 2013, 2014, etc., with no other search terms to find out how many papers were available in the database for each year, and then compared the rate of increase with that of our papers. Scopas annoyingly doesn't have this functionality, but I felt that Science Direct gave a good impression. For all papers, the per year increase was about 4%, while the increase in retrofit papers was about 25% per year. This meant that we could feel justified in saying that this is a growing field. Alice and I discussed the initial results and decided that we were getting good coverage of relevant papers and finding the papers that we'd expect. However, there were a lot of papers, so we decided that we'd focus on those from 2017 onwards, partly because some of the subject-specific methods had developed significantly since 2013. We agreed that I would review the first 50 abstracts to see what proportion were relevant, and furthermore do some thematic categorization, including method, country under study, type of retrofit, type of building, whether they included operational, embodied or life cycle carbon, and a few other categories that developed during the process. This categorization began to throw out some useful results, so we decided to carry on with it for the rest of the abstracts. But it also showed that around 75 to 80% of the papers did seem to be relevant. There were therefore a lot of papers, and the review had to be fitted around other work as no one was funding it. We just thought that it was a good thing to do. It therefore took most of 2024 to get through all the abstracts. We communicated about the review every couple of weeks by email, so that as we went, we were able to refine the thematic analysis and the inclusion-exclusion criteria. We also discussed any abstracts that were sort of, but not entirely relevant, and either made a decision or noted that they needed further investigation. For example, a check of the full paper to see if it did in fact include quantifiable data. Eventually, in November 2024, I had looked through all the abstracts and started counting up, visualizing and considering the results from the thematic analysis. I like playing with charts and graphs, so this was the fun bit for me. I also started my ESRC fellowship in November and could devote some of my fellowship time to the review, which was really helpful. Looking at the results, we decided that we had enough interesting findings that the abstract review merited its own paper as a meta-analysis of the literature. However, we also realised that because the initial review had taken so long, the data was now a bit out of date. We'd be submitting for publication in 2025 with 2023 data, so I did an update to the review in January using exactly the same search terms and process to include papers published up to the end of 2024. This added an extra 276 abstracts, but I was able to devote more time to it, so it was finished by February. The final numbers were therefore over 8,000 papers returned by the 2 database searches, which were whittled down to 1,348 papers after title sifting and removal of duplicates between the start of 2017 and the end of 2024. And finally, 1,050 relevant papers after the abstract sifting. I updated all the results visualizations in March and did a number of cross-tabulations of different pieces of data, for example, cross-tabulating the year of publication with the percentage of the results that included only operational carbon or embodied life cycle carbon, which showed rather worryingly that the percentage of papers considering beyond operational impacts did not increase during the study period, holding fairly steady at just under a third of papers. The papers in our review studied 96 different countries, and trying to visually display this was challenging, but eventually we settled on a heat map of the percentage of papers studying different regions using UN divisions, accompanied by a chart of the top 25 most studied countries. And apologies that the writing is so small on the map. Darker colours indicate more papers. We were also interested in the disparity between the population of a country, and hence, presumably, its number of buildings, and the number of retrofit papers from it. For instance, China is vastly larger than Italy, the UK or Spain, but has a similar number of papers. This gave me the opportunity to do something that I've always wanted to do, and create a bubble graph, which cross-references population with the number of retrofit papers, where the size of the bubble indicates the number of papers per million people to help portray this disparity. The largest bubbles are Cyprus and Malta, which both have a reasonable number of papers and very small populations. Italy, Spain and the UK are still doing fairly well, but you can see that China, at the far top right, has a very small bubble because it's got such a large population, as does the USA because it has a large population and a limited number of papers, over 4 times less than Canada when adjusted for population, for example. While we were in the middle of the thematic analysis, Alice found a bibliographic literature review that used network analysis and software called VOSviewer to look at the connections between keywords in different articles. The VOSviewer software is freely available from the University of Leiden, so we thought we would investigate whether we could use it to draw some further insights from our data. We could have done more analysis around co-citations if we downloaded the original search results in a different format, but because we only had the reference management files, we were a bit limited. However, we were able to do analysis of the co-occurrence of keywords in the abstracts, which showed some interesting groupings of subject matter, as you can see on the slide. We were also able to do a co-authorship analysis, which helped us identify the 36 authors with more than 5 relevant publications in our review. This was helpful as we could then look these people up and identify which department or discipline and which country they were based in, which helped to confirm our feeling that research in this area is multidisciplinary and international. It was interesting to experiment with the tool, and it added another method and angle to our paper. The other novel thing that we did was to have a section categorising the papers that we excluded and providing some examples of each category. This included papers on policy aspects of retrofit but with no qualification of potential carbon savings, laboratory studies that considered material performance but not in the context of a building, papers that created new methods but which failed to apply them to any case studies, and papers that looked at improving indoor environmental quality in buildings, for example, a very innovative system to use low-cost netting to increase sun reflection and reduce overheating in tropical buildings, but which didn't include any energy or carbon implications, as well as a number of others. It was possible to do this because we kept notes on the spreadsheet about why we'd excluded each paper, so it was fairly easy to go back and categorise. We thought it was a good thing to do because a lot of the excluded papers are useful and interesting for the wider retrofit conversation, even though they didn't fit the specific parameters of our study. We're currently finalising the paper and we'll get it submitted before the end of May. We've chosen Renewable and Sustainable Energy Reviews as a journal that's frequently used in research for this area, has a high impact factor, and will let us have a paper that's 10,000 word long, plus bibliography. Unfortunately, the average time from submission to publication for Renewable and Sustainable Energy Reviews is 8.5 months, which feels pretty ridiculous, but they do allow you to publish a preprint, so we're hopefully going to do that to get the findings out there more quickly. We'll be sharing it with the people involved in the Net Zero Carbon Building Standard, as well as the rest of our networks, and we'll probably try to create a graphical abstract that helps to summarise the findings. We'll also be making the underlying spreadsheet with all of the abstracts and the thematic analysis openly available alongside the paper so that other researchers can use it for their own work, as it's a resource that could be used to answer a range of research questions. Finally, after we've had a bit of a rest, we'll look at reviewing a subset of the full papers, probably the 300 or so that consider embodied or life cycle carbon. We want to try to specify the carbon ranges for different retrofit measures and buildings and write it up as a second paper. So that's where we've got to so far, and I'll now summarise some key reflections and takeaways. This was a literature review that started off as a fairly small project to help support something else, and then somehow kept growing and turned into quite a large standalone project. The changes have led to something that will be more valuable to more people, which is good and increases the impact. However, it's also meant that it's taken a lot longer than we had originally planned. There are several key takeaways from the process. First, it's good to be clear about what you want to achieve before you start doing a literature review and to set clear parameters so that you can make sure you're working towards that goal and achieving your aims. It's also good to be open to opportunities and alternatives that develop during the course of the work, as this can lead to much greater value and potential impact from your review. So, for example, the abstract review was just going to be a subsection in a paper, but then we decided it merited its own. But the trick is to ensure that you're investigating opportunities and exploring alternatives because you have taken an active decision to do so, not just because you've stumbled into it and it turns into an unwieldy beast that you don't feel in control of. Remember that you don't have to expand things if you don't want to. It's about getting a balance that you feel comfortable with. Don't underestimate the time that literature reviewing takes. I estimate that our review has taken at least 300 hours of work to get to this point, And when you're trying to fit it in around other research activities, this ends up being a long time and may lead to the need for updates to keep the content relevant. However, not having a hard deadline has meant that we've been able to play around with different methods, such as the network analysis, explore different questions, and refine our findings through several iterations. So it's been positive in that sense, even though it's taken forever. Definitely take notes as you're going along. Consider doing it in a structured way, and ideally in a way that will make sense to others, so that if you end up making your data available, which is good practice, can increase impact, and is often a funder requirement, you don't have to spend months getting it into a suitable format. I realised this about 100 abstracts in, which led me to start thinking about expressing my short summaries for each abstract in a more professional way. It was also really helpful to us to have the notes when we went back to do extra analysis and couldn't remember why we'd done so and so with abstract number 578. It was also useful when we were writing the method section and justifying our choices. Collaboration with someone else can be really positive, as long as Nasrul said earlier, you're clear about who is doing what and that your co-authors are making useful contributions. It's nice to have someone to bounce ideas around, discuss any uncertainties, and to split the work with. Alice and I really enjoy working together, and while I did all of the actual reviewing, we spent a lot of time discussing different aspects and developing ideas together, and she's done a lot of reviewing a lot of writing the paper. I'm going to be the first author for this one, and for the next stage we're going to split the full papers between us with sufficient checks to ensure that we're reviewing and making decisions consistently. This type of collaboration can be less easy in a PhD, but there might still be opportunities to work with someone else in your field on a review that's relevant to both of you. Good quality literature reviews are often some of the most cited papers because they help summarise what is going on in a field. They can be helpful not only for academics, but also for professionals and policymakers, although they may require shorter summaries of the key points backed up by the full paper. It's fairly safe to say that you will have to do or will have done some form of literature reviewing at some point in your PhD, so it's definitely worth thinking about how you can get the most out of it. Hopefully, the literature review that I've discussed will give you some inspiration for how to make the most out of your own reviews. Thank you for listening. I'm looking forward to the discussion and questions, and if you want to follow up with me on anything, my email is on the slide and I'll put it in the chat as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Freya. Thank you. I will move swiftly on to the questions, the Q&A, because we have quite a few questions coming through. Please do continue to drop these in the chat box. I think, Freya, I'll just kind of start or continue, I suppose, with you. So there is one clarification question. And Kezia asks, did you synthesize data or findings from across the 1,000 papers, or was this more like a systematic scoping review?
So it was a systematic review. What we did was a thematic analysis based on the content of the abstracts. So we extracted from the abstracts the methods that were used, for example, in each paper, and then looked at, okay, so 30% of the papers use this method, 10% use this, and then illustrated that with examples of particular papers. Does that clarify the question?
Yeah, we'll wait for a response on that, I think. But thank you. Another question for you. Can you imagine returning to this literature in 10 years to bring it up to date?
Oh, now that's a good question. Potentially, yeah. I mean, it could be interesting. It's something that I've enjoyed doing, and it's been really useful to look at the trends. So it would be interesting to certainly come back and have a glance at it in 10 years and go, oh, were we correct about the trends, or has it actually all moved in an entirely different way?
Yeah, definitely. Right. We did get a few questions earlier on from Nasrul, from Katrina. The first question is, what distinguishes publishable literature review material from that which isn't, but is good enough for inclusion in your PhD thesis?
Right. Thank you, Katriona. So I would say that if I were you, I would focus on publishing the areas that are directly related to your thesis, something that don't focus on kind of like areas that are tangent. So areas that you definitely, the major area of your thesis perhaps have a look at your research questions, for example. The reason why I'm saying that is that it is likely that at a later stage, you want to publish the empirical work, perhaps the quant or the qual results from your interviews, for example. So you can use the literature review that you publish strategically to roll out that red carpet for you to publish for the subsequent outputs. Hopefully that makes sense.
Fantastic. The second question as well from Catriona.
Yeah.
What would you consider unjustified feedback from reviewers, i.e. feedback that's not worth making changes in response to?
Right. Okay. So a good editor will usually tell you focus on the feedback from reviewer 2. For example, don't focus on the feedback on reviewer 1 on X, Y, Z. So a good editor will tell you what to focus. But if the editor doesn't do that, then my advice will be to either comply with what the reviewers ask you to do or explain why you are not going to follow their advice. So unjustified feedback may be feedback that is not usually helpful for your manuscript. For example, if they ask you to change the direction of the manuscript substantially, that is one thing. And another one that I came across before happened to me as well during my PhD is that there is one reviewer who asked me to cite about 12 of his articles. That is ridiculous. So I, I said, I'm not going to cite all these 12, I'm just going to cite one. And I can see why, that reviewer asked me to do that. It's desperation that they want to increase the citation of their work. But be firm if that ever happens to any of you.
Thank you. So stand firm. Right. So during the course of this webinar, we've also had a little bit of a conversation thread going on the difference between a monograph and a published paper from a thesis. I suppose perhaps if Angeline and Nasrul would like to kind of chime in and kind of discuss some of your kind of experiences and kind of advice on the two.
Nasrul, do you want to start?
Yeah, happy to. So you can publish both. You can publish articles and you can publish monograph. So again, so monograph tends to be between 60 to 80,000 words. So I think it is very, very likely that by the end of your PhD, you would have written over 100,000 words. So be strategic. The only thing about monograph is that it's going to take a longer kind of like period of time to do. And this is usually this will usually happen at the end of your PhD. So in my case, I had the contract from Routledge to publish a monograph in December 2020. But that monograph was not submitted to the manuscript. The whole manuscript for the book, for the monograph, wasn't submitted to the publisher until February 2022. So it's going to take a long time. So my advice for me is to produce article first. And if you think that you have enough materials, then consider monograph. But that's going to be towards the end of your PhD.
I don't have a great deal to add to that because in my field, monographs aren't really a thing. It's all about the journal articles. So yes, go with what Nasrul said.
And just to back that up, there are different, like some disciplines, if you're really going for it as a career as an academic, it makes a big difference to publish a monograph, to be publishing a book. And for other disciplines, it really doesn't make much difference at all. Usually your thinking moves along a bit, and through the process of writing a book, things are going to change. So self-plagiarism shouldn't be a big problem as long as you keep on thinking about what you're writing. I would say I put the link in for that presentation on the monograph. So if it is something you're interested in, just do go and watch that webinar, and you'll find loads of information in there. It's 4 years ago, but not much has changed in that time. So do make use of that resource if you're interested.
Fantastic. We are still welcoming questions. We've got another about 5 minutes before we can end. So do keep questions coming if you have any. I'll kind of start off with another one. Obviously, very kind of helpful illustrations and very practical tips from both our speakers today. But it does seem to me that this is a lot of work beyond perhaps your research project that you're focusing on of your PGR or ECR. How do you juggle? How do you juggle everything? Do you have any ways of coping? Do you have any tips to offer?
So with this this current literature review that I did, I worked out how long it took, how many abstracts I could get reviewed in an hour, and then I sort of went, okay, I'll try and do that many a day and just keep chugging away at it and see how that goes. But just thinking about another literature review that I did during my PhD, in the first year of my PhD, my supervisor suggested a conference that did peer-reviewed conference papers that's very prestigious that I could potentially apply to. And I was in the process of doing a systematic literature review on embodied carbon and heritage buildings anyway for my sort of first literature review chapter for my first stage review of my PhD. And so I managed to integrate that and turn that into a really nice conference paper, really detailed, that was then able to use as a literature review for the first stage review, and then also ended up as part of my literature review in my thesis, as well as being published as this conference paper. And that's, again, I think that's probably one of my most cited articles, because that got published as a journal article afterwards, because that was what the conference did. So that was quite helpful to be able to sort of meet lots of different requirements in one go.
Taking advantage of that work and spinning it off as much as you can. Yeah, fair enough. Nasrul, do you have any advice that you can offer?
Yeah, so well, you're doing you know, a project on that topic anyway, so it's not going to be you know, another different project on top of what you are expected to do. Of course, PhD, your thesis is a priority, but if you can, you know, carve out some time in your diary, perhaps an hour a day, to look, you know, to work towards your publication, I think that's not going to be a problem. Yeah, multitasking, but do prioritize your thesis. But you can do your articles as well.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm just going to leave a link to a quick survey. It'd be very helpful to us if you could just fill out this quick survey to let us know how you found today's session, and also, more importantly, perhaps, what other training would you want us to put on in the future, so we can keep delivering training that is actually helpful and to you and beneficial. I don't see any more further questions, so perhaps we can wrap it up here, 2 minutes ahead of schedule. And I'd like to say thank you once again to everyone who has participated today. Thank you very much to Nasrul and Freya for the incredible sharing. There's final few words from Angeline. Working on publications
I
can
was
help.
just saying, never be afraid to publish while you're working on your PhD. As an experienced supervisor, I find those people who do a few publications as they go along often are processing their main argument and thesis, and it actually can speed things up as you work to get towards the end and you're working on discussion or conclusion. But thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you especially to Nasrul and Freya. It's been quite a lively debate we've had going on, and clearly this is an important issue. Do make use of the resources we have. I've popped some links into the chat, but if you want to look into this area a bit more, then do make use of those resources.
Right, thank you very much, Angeline. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending.
And thank you, Jonathan, for sharing.